Welcome to Off Panel.
Yo everybody, welcome to Off Panel. I'm your host, David Harper, and this week's guest is the artist of the Wildstorm at DC Comics. It's Jon Davis-Hunt. Thanks for coming on, Jon.
Hello. Oh, it's a real pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So, Jon, today we're going to be talking all about the Wildstorm with Warren Ellis. But before we get into that, I always like talking about background of the creators who come on for the first time. But I want to start with a really specific and random place that ties in both to the Wildstorm and into a comic you and I particularly enjoy that I don't know anyone else that's ever even read. It was WildCATs Aliens from Warren Ellis, Chris Sprouse, Kevin Nowlan, and more. I love that comic. I've literally never even met another person who's actually read it, and liked it. Before we go anywhere, I just want to know, why is that a much better comic than people might expect?
So first of all, it's so are we allowed to have spoilers here?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think that comic came out 15 years ago.
What's awesome? So I read it first of all when it came out as the actual individual issues, and then I bought it. It is collected in one of the trades, but why it's awesome is it's a movie tie-in with actual like long-lasting effects, because basically it's the original Stormwatch team versus the aliens, and the aliens just kill a huge bunch of previously like important key characters and kill them with them. And loads of them get deaded.
Yeah.
And I think it was a two-parter. Was it a two-parter or a three-parter? And I can remember picking it up because I was quite into. I'd got back into Stormwatch, I think, just after Warren had started writing it again, and I was really enjoying it. And then this happened, and a whole bunch of characters died. And then I was trying to like tell people this is awesome. This is like it has a real long-lasting effect. But I think. At that time, I think people were a bit jaded about Alien and Predator style crossover because they were popping up like all over the place.
Right.
Yeah, I'm surprised as well that it's not held up more. It's not being reprinted more as well, because it's fantastic and it's got really good art. It's
Chris Sprouse and Kevin Nowlan inking them.
That's it. Yeah. Yes, it looks great as well. Yeah, it was brilliant. Such a good comic.
And it's actually, I think it's Laura Martin that colored them, so it's like an unbelievable like all-time art team. Yeah, no, I think that comic is super underrated, and I think it's entirely because of the fact that it's an Aliens tie-in, and it just like people don't expect anything out of it because it's like, oh, this is just gonna be a silly thing, and it's this comic that actually has like super ramifications that totally leads directly into the Authority, and the funny. So, do you know the story behind it? At all?
No.
I came across this just because I was trying to recall exactly what happened, and I ended up rereading it last night. It still holds up, but on the Wikipedia page, if you read it, apparently Warren didn't originally want to write it, and the editor of the book, Scott Dunbier, the guy who actually does the artist editions for IDW, I believe, he told him, he was like, "You can kill whoever you want," and Warren was basically like, "I'm listening. All right, I'm interested." I just love the fact that like the thing that really drew Warren in was the fact that he could kill whoever he want, and then he did.
Yeah, and what's cool is as well there were no like reversals or backtracking. I think after, because like Winter gets killed in it.
Fuji, Fahrenheit, Hellstrike.
Yeah, it doesn't. And like they were like cool characters. I mean, yeah, like Fuji was almost like the thing of the kind of Stormwatch sort of universe, and he gets totally deaded, and then that's it. He doesn't come back. They don't come back later in the Authority or anything like that.
Yeah, it was kind of like clearing the decks so Warren could do all of his stuff that he was going to do, because I think like Stormwatch was only around for like another issue before like the Authority and Planetary kicked off.
Yeah, was the High storyline previous to that?
I think
I need
so.
to go back and read
it was the High. Was that the Jackson King versus Henry Bendick story?
Yeah, and it had the guy who was like, was he called the High? It was the one who was like a Superman kind of archetype.
Oh,
he was like in blue, had a red cape, I think. God, was he called the High?
I don't recall. Honestly, like I feel like the Stormwatch stuff during that era was one of the most underrated comics in like the last 25 years. And I really need to go back and reread it. But, so tying back into this, obviously you've been a comic fan for a while. Let's go back to the beginning for you. Like, what came first for you, comics or art?
Gosh, that's a good question. I remember the first comic I remember had a massive impact was the first issue of the Transformers comic, the UK version, which was basically printing Marvel's run. And I was 6 when I got the first issue of that. And I can remember from that point onwards, because I then got that every week, from that point onwards, I just loved comics. So I must have physically drawn stuff before that point, but at that point as well, going forwards, all I then drew was stuff from the comics I was reading. So then the two kind of just went sort of hand in hand. So I kind of would buy everything. So over here, we didn't really have comic book shops, or certainly there weren't any around where I kind of lived. And we had British comics, which were normally reprinted, kind of American stuff, but it wasn't reprinted like one for one. So you wouldn't have like just a Superman comic and a Batman comic or a Flash or a X-Men comic. What you'd get is like Marvel would do like a sort of a compendium of like 4 or 5 comics or 4 or 5 different stories and just chucked into one oversized kind of issue. And that might come out like every sort of 3 or 4 months or like a season or something. So I used to get those, and then I started picking up I was picking up those reprints, and then I would go to car boot sales and pick up old American comics that I'd find here and there. And it wasn't until really I was about 11 or 12 and a comic shop finally opened up in my hometown that I really kind of got into American comics in a big way. And that was during the time of it was Silvestri and Claremont's run on the X-Men that then segued into Jim Lee. And so, I know I was hooked, basically. I was a massive X-Men fan. Also, the Brayfogle Batman run as well. That was like a huge part of my kind of growing up. Just so many. Felt like there were so many awesome books around that time. And then I collected all of those. And then I sort of fell out of love a bit with comics. Like you hit kind of that teenage age where other stuff like music and girls and everything else.
Right.
And then I went to university, and the city I went to at uni, that had 2 or 3 comic book shops. And that was around the time where sort of Warren was doing stuff with the Authority and Planetary, and Preacher was coming out, and Transmet. And then I got massively back into comics again, and just bought. I used to go to the comic shop almost every day. Over here, when you go to uni, back then anyway, when I went to uni, I'd sometimes only have like 1 hour of lectures like a day. And the intention was the rest of the day you were meant to be, revising and like working. I'd just go straight to comic book shop and get as many comics as I could get my hands on, go back, read them. And I was still drawing a lot in my spare time. I've sort of, I think the two just went hand in hand, basically.
Yeah. Anybody who's listened to my podcast before, where I've talked about my personal background with comics, basically now realizes that you are the British version of me, because I had like the exact same upbringing. Like Transformers was the first comic that got me into comics. X-Men was what hooked me, and then I had a gap, and then actually the last comic I read before my gap was Preacher. And I always have said, I was just like, I don't know if it was I just wanted a gap because of the aforementioned music and girls and all that stuff, or it was like I don't think any comic can top Preacher for me, and I'm just going to quit now because I've peaked. But anyways, I got back in because like Why the Last Man and Fables and The Walking Dead, those are the ones that hooked me back in. But at the same time, I was also like reading Authority and Planetary and everything like that. But it is funny. Like I feel like our story, like the X-Men kids and stuff like that, is a common one. But there's some variations within. We have quite a lot of similarities there. But did you even conceptualize as you were growing up, or even in university, that working in comics as an artist was a thing you could do?
No. It was well, if you'd asked me when I was young, when I was a kid, I would have said I wanted to draw comics. That was what I wanted to do. And then over here, so I basically took as you go through school, you sort of reduce the amount of subjects that you do over here.
Sure.
And we have different kind of exam levels. And the top exam level before you go to university over here is a thing called A levels, and you only pick 3 subjects. And so I picked art, graphic design, and English. But at that point as well, art became very much, it was very traditional. It was based on, studying the masters, and I just wasn't interested in sort of looking at Van Gogh or Picasso or anything. I can appreciate them more now I'm older, but at the time I just wanted to draw comic stuff. I just, I was getting really, at that point as well, I was getting really into some sort of British artists as well. I just discovered kind of manga for the first time, and French comics as well. So I was reading to Mobius and Katsuhiro Otomo and stuff. And so I basically would hand in projects that were just getting me like fails, literally, because you'd be requested to do, a nice kind of pastoral scene, and I'd be drawing like some sniper with a giant or something, and so I was getting really disillusioned with art, and I almost I did feel almost like, well, maybe this isn't for me. I didn't see how you could become a comic book artist, but I ended up going to art college, and luckily I did, because at art college I really found that all of that other stuff dropped away, and they really pushed you to kind of discover all these different types of art, like illustration, modern graphic design, typography, and they were more than happy for me to kind of go off and explore comics. And then as a result of that, I think, because I didn't feel the pressure to kind of not do certain things, then I did kind of pay more attention to sort of art history. But still, at that point now, I had no idea how to become a comic book artist. I didn't really know what I was going to do. I knew I wanted to do art. I knew I had to make a career doing it. So I was looking at doing product design, basically, designing cars or designing toasters or something.
Right. And
I happened to be in a pottery class, which is the one thing at art college I didn't enjoy doing, which was like making pots. And my lecturer came in and said, anyone that doesn't want to be in this particular class, if you want, you can go to this hall down the corridor, and there's a guy giving a talk about games design.
Oh, wow.
And like game art from a university. So me and a couple of other guys, we were like, yeah, we'll go and do that then. So I went into this big sort of room. There wasn't that many people in there, actually. And this guy gave a talk, basically, about this course that they were just starting, where you could learn, which was then the kind of the birth of kind of the sort of the digital art that was just starting to happen. So things like Photoshop and Softimage and 3D Studio Max, and then you can go and like make video games. And we were all like, yeah, let's do that. So
that's so great on pottery.
Yeah, I was like, I'm gonna make video games. I like video games, and that seemed to be as almost as fun as comics, but I could see how there was a career there. So yeah, me and a few other guys from this art college, we then went off to uni, spent 3 years learning how to do CGI stuff, basically. And then I got a job. That's how I got my first gig in video games, was straight out of university. But the whole time I was still reading comics. I still love comics. And I basically worked in video games for about 10 years. And the bug, the kind of itch of just like, oh, really, I want to make comics. And I love making video games as well. But I met, through working at Codemasters, I met a guy called Lee Garbett, who's now also an artist. Yeah, so we happened to share a desk. He sat directly opposite me, and it was finding someone else that also wanted to do comics but didn't know how to, and we were kind of two sort of kindred spirits, really. So we over the space of 6 months, we'd go to the pub like most nights after work. We'd be like, right, how can we do comics? Let's make comics. Neither of us knew what to do, but in the end we did a portfolio each, and we went off to a Comic-Con over here. And we both got gigs, basically. Lee for a company called AP, and I got a gig for 2000 AD, and that was it. And then
I know Lee's work quite well, and that's funny. For some reason, I thought he'd been working in comics for a while. Maybe I'm like mixing him up with another Lee, like I've mashed him up into a super Lee or something like that. But his art is fantastic. That's funny that you guys sat right next to each other.
Yeah.
I am curious, like, so you mentioned that you liked video games before you went into that fateful classroom, but were video games like an influence on your art as you were growing up as well? Like, I mean, were you were a fan, but was it something that you kind of turned to, like a specific aesthetic or something like that at all?
Yeah, not probably as much when I was younger. Actually, probably it was. It's been more since I've started working in comics that I think I've been more influenced by particularly the digital side of video game art. So obviously, when I was younger, I loved like the Street Fighter series and all the kind of like the Udon Studio stuff that would come out. But really, like when I was into games back in the sort of early like late 80s, early 90s, video game art wasn't it wasn't the level it was now. Just
Right.
there just wasn't fidelity. It had some cool box art, but it was really in the last sort of 10, 15 years working within studios and working with like other, because I moved out of the art side of video games and worked as a designer, but I'd kind of like lead kind of concept teams, and seeing people using like pushing the digital art side of things, photo bashing and all this kind of cool digital painting that people were doing, that made me then get really into kind of digital concept art and video game art as as an art form. I think some of the stuff that people are doing now is just like incredible, and so I get a lot more from it now, I think. But no, when I was younger, I just loved games. I mean, I've always loved playing video games. Most of my family holidays can be marked by going abroad somewhere, and they'd be, my folks would go out in the evening, would go for a meal, and they'd always be in the corner of a restaurant each holiday. Some fantastic video game like R-Type would be there, or like Double Dragon, or Bad Dudes vs Dragon Ninja. And each holiday, I can remember each holiday, I can clearly remember the video game that I then played for 2 weeks. Because also back when we were younger as well, like there was a big difference between what you could play at home and what you could play like in the arcade.
Yeah.
That's so. Yeah, I mean, I'm very lucky to have got to work in both industries. They've both been fantastically enjoyable, actually.
Yeah, I do think you mentioned how like the late 80s, early 90s for video games were not like this. I mean, it was back in like sprites and pixel, like where like the pixel and arts or the art was not like really refined or anything like that, just because of the technology. But the funny thing is like I was a huge Final Fantasy fan growing up. And, yeah, and like I remember like the art on the strategy guides were what really got me. Like it was just astoundingly detailed, beautiful, beautiful art. But I guess I never really thought about the art in the games being all that. I guess it really took until like I don't know, maybe like the PlayStation came out where it really kind of started kicking it to the next level.
Yeah, and I think you got like, well, I mean, I think the Japanese were doing it first because they had so many more concept artists involved in their teams. Like you say, with the Final Fantasy games, that was what's his name? I've got his art book here somewhere. You
mean like the main designer?
Yeah. He does amazing painted and ink drawings. But it wasn't until I think with PlayStation as well, you also had a lot of like artistic design and graphic design coming in. So you had like with the WildCATs series, you had all the Designers Republic stuff that came in, and then you started to have CGI art as well. Was sort of completely with PlayStation 2, and then you had games like the Metal Gear Solid series, where you had all that fantastic artwork coming out, character designs and stuff. And yeah, I mean, there's still a huge amount of skill in terms of pixel art, but I think what wasn't possible to translate back then was if you had a real artistic vision,
right,
you couldn't necessarily replicate that, make it stand out as much. Whereas like now you have games that purposefully look a specific certain way, not just in terms of restrictions, but like the actual techniques that are used can be replicated. You can replicate watercolor, you can replicate 16-bit sort of digital pixel art, or you can go for like photoreal, or you can go for something that's like sort of mind-blowing and trippy. It's just become, I think visually, I think games have become, particularly in the last 10 years, they've become so diverse. And yeah, so that's really, whereas back when we were younger, it was more just like graphics were just how good can they be, not necessarily stylized can they be? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I remember having my mind blown by Star Fox, and now I look at it, I'm just like, that
Yeah,
looks
yeah.
so weird. Yeah, I think the first game that I remember being really like stylistically its own thing while working with like kind of next generation graphics was there was a Dreamcast game that was called Jet Grind Radio here. It was Jet Set Radio.
Oh yeah, totally. Jet Set Radio over here. Yeah, yeah, that was amazing. That was, I know that was because people were like, oh, it's like a cartoon,
Yeah, the
but
cell
it's like
shading.
also 3D. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And that was great because that was a game that wasn't just visually like stylistic. That those visuals led into the gameplay itself. You know, the fact
Right.
it had BT mechanic and it just the kind of the way that the animations were rendered as well. And it was that was a great the Dreamcast as well. What a fantastic little console.
It's so underrated. Like they came out with like the SNES Classic, which obviously is a different generation than a Dreamcast. But I'm like, I want like a Dreamcast like that I can have that has a bunch of games stashed on. I want to play like that and like Choo Choo Rocket and like Shenmue and all kinds of stuff. I don't know. That system was loaded with great stuff. But I did want to ask about what you did in that world. I like because I was reading a bunch of interviews you did, and you had this quote that I thought was really interesting, especially considering the fact it's not what I expect from the design world. And it was you said you don't really get to draw as a designer apart from the odd sketch on a whiteboard. It's primarily a written and vocal discipline. Like what was your job like? I guess I always expected a more constant art flow for you, but it sounds like it wasn't really like that.
Yeah, so when I first started in video games, I started basically as an artist, as an environmental artist. So that's literally making, environments. So
Yeah.
grass, trees, buildings, rocks, and you're just told what to do there. And a lot of the time, you're working off a photo reference as well. So there's not a huge amount of not a huge amount of creative input, particularly back when I started as well. So when I was doing that job, that would have been basically middle of the PlayStation 1 cycle. So this was like very end of the 90s. And you were just playing with pixels. You'd have textures that were literally 16 by 16 or 32 by 32. And you had a reduced color palette, so you couldn't have within that more than, say, 16 or 32 colors. So you're literally just moving blocks around of like gray and green. So it gets pretty, it's a bit mind numbing. But then I graduated from that. I became a concept artist. That was doing character design. That was really cool. And I did a couple of great gigs on games that unfortunately never saw the light of day. I had one brilliant. I spent 6 months working on a game called Dragon Empire, which was just never going to come out. It was so ridiculously ambitious. Like everyone working on the game was like, this is never going to get made. But we would just sit there, me and a load of other concept artists, just like designing monsters and designing buildings. And that was awesome. But it was during that time as well, I was like, well, I really want to have more creative control over what the game is, how it plays, and what you do. And I had done games design as a discipline back at university, so I had some understanding of game mechanics and how games are put together. So I basically just pushed for a position within the studio that was in games design. And I started off as a junior, and eventually I worked my way up to become a lead. So games design as a discipline it is written and verbal. It is fundamentally the art of designing a game, writing down the instructions for how the game is going to work. So initially, the first phase of that is coming up with what game it is that you're going to make, and pitching it to kind of stakeholders and saying, right, we're going to do this. This is what the main themes are. This is what the player's going to do. And then as you go through each phase, and you finally go into kind of pre-development and development, you're writing design documentation, or you're leading teams that are writing design documentation. And that's all very detailed instructions for engineers to actually go and build the systems that create the game. So there's no art, there's no physical art produced, not by the design team anyway, but it's incredibly creative because you have direct say in how everything works and what the player's going to do and what they're going to experience. It's a fantastic. It is making games is brilliant, and I've been very fortunate as well to work with. I work as a creative consultant now, and I have a lot to do with a studio called Playground Games over here in the UK. They make the Forza Horizon series, and they're a brilliant bunch of guys. A really fantastic team, really driven studio. and it's brilliant. It is really good. But the only downside to making games, I wouldn't say it's a downside. It's just the biggest difference between games and comics is, especially now, there's so much money riding on something that takes such a long amount of time that you have to justify everything that you want to do, and you can't take as many creative risks as you necessarily can do with. What's fantastic about comics is
it's kind of all on you.
Yeah, and you're just like, right, I'm going to draw this. I'm going to make, and you accumulate so much of the decisions, and you don't have to really check in with anyone else. I mean, obviously, you have to. If Warren writes a script, I can't just like add elephants in if they're not specific. But it's a very fast. Comics is very fast, very exciting, very instantly creative. Games is totally different. It's still very creative, but in a very different way. It's much more collaborative. It's slower. It's almost like putting a puzzle together as well. You have to think when you make games a lot, right. And it can be quite difficult, but then ultimately incredibly rewarding as well. Yes.
Do you feel like that time as a lead designer, but in video games overall, like has helped you with how you kind of handle process and time management as a comic artist?
Yeah, I would say definitely. Yeah, I'm very, very rigid with my sort of use of time. So I have a set work day. I get up at a certain time. I mean, we have 2 small children, so I shuffle things around so I can take them to school, and sometimes I pick them up as well. But I tend to get up and start work at sort of 7 o'clock. I'll have a break to take them to school, then I'll crack on, and then I try and always finish between sort of 5 and 6. But that's if I'm working on a schedule where I'm just doing my 1 page a day. Often though, things happen and you have to do more than that, and that's when you do in comics you end up working, late. Sometimes you work at weekends and stuff. But then saying that, you do that in games as well. Games is exactly the same. Mm-hmm. When you're on crunch, you can end up. I've worked on projects where it's been 8 to midnight, 6 days a week, sort of thing. Mm-hmm. So both, but no, it has. I'm sort of working in games. Your time management is so important, and so I think I did find it relatively easy to kind of shift out of that and work for myself, because the hardest thing. It's not hard. It's very easy to get distracted when you're making comics at home, because my day is basically me sat here with Netflix on.
Right.
It's really easy to like go on the internet or like stop drawing and just watch Netflix.
Right. Exactly.
Because there's no one here shouting at you. The shouting only comes if you the book's meant to be out and you've not drawn anything. But yeah, I work with my wife as well, so she's a big part of the process when it comes, especially on the design side, because she's a designer herself. So we do a lot of the character design stuff together and bounce ideas off each other. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so because I enjoy it so much, I'm very protective over it as well. So I do tend to be very strict with how I start, what I do during the day, and when I finish.
Yeah, that's good. I don't think your editor would appreciate if you ended up just drawing an adaptation of a Netflix series instead of Warren's script.
I know.
I read something in an interview where you said that a guy that I'm a huge fan of, who also was in video games and comics, was kind of an inspiration for your scheduling, Nate Simpson.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, so this was at a time where I was working in games and I was doing comics on the side. I was finding it really difficult. And I read something that Nate put where when he was doing the first issue of Non-Player, he was getting up at 4 o'clock and working and then going to work. Mm-hmm. And I was like, I'm going to do that. I think we just had our first child at the time. This was about 6 or 7 years ago.
You're like, that's not that big of a change of pace for my schedule anyways.
Well, so I was thinking, well, I'm up anyway. Like I'm physically up. I'm awake. I'm just in bed, sort of wishing that I was asleep. Why don't I just get up and then go and do stuff? So yeah, for about 2 or 3 years, I would get up at 4 o'clock. And that it's actually surprisingly easy to do if you go to bed at a sensible time. Mm-hmm. So you have to make yourself go to bed about 9 o'clock, 9:30. and then you can do it. And the great thing is as well, and I did actually sometimes I don't get up at 4 o'clock anymore, but sometimes I get up at 5 or 6, and the feeling that you have if you get to like lunchtime, like 12 o'clock, and you basically done a day's work, it's fantastic, because then you're like, I'm just going to chill out
and watch Netflix.
Yeah, I'm going to watch even more Netflix. So he was really good. I think because the hardest thing about getting into comics is making the transition. There was a time where I was literally doing 2 jobs essentially, and that's hard, because all you're doing is working. But then saying that, work you are doing is awesome and enjoyable. The hardest effect I think it has is on your family life. But it's all sort of worth it in the long run to get to a point where you can, work at home and do something that you just love doing.
Yeah. So last question before we get into the Wildstorm. I do one thing I wanted to bring up that I think is kind of funny, and this may just be me. I may not be like remotely accurate in this. Is that before you came over to work on Clean Room, it kind of felt like you had this entire career in video games and working in British comics, and then you came over to work on that and like the Wildstorm, and it was all of a sudden like, check out this new guy. Yeah, look at him. He's like totally new, and you're like, I've been doing this for a while. Was that kind of a weird sensation, or was that just me thinking that?
No, I'd seen it happen with other people, so I knew some other artists and writers, and it was very similar. So I knew that was kind of the case. I knew that everything you do prior to your first American book it doesn't appear on the radar of kind of American editors.
Yeah.
But I was really lucky to meet Shelley Bond, who hired me for Clean Room. She's always had a big appreciation of kind of British stuff, so she actually saw my work in 2000 AD,
mm-hmm.
and she contacted sort of me. So but it is a bit, but then also saying that, because I learned a lot of my stuff on the job effectively over here, I'm not too bothered about people finding the stuff that I did, because a lot of the stuff I did was frankly like terrible. And I'm very fortunate as well that Matt Smith, who's the editor of 2000 AD as well, let me make so many massive mistakes on the page.
Right.
I know everyone says as an artist you look back on your early work and you cringe. You always find something sort of negative. But I mean, really, some of the stuff I did was just because I was trying things out. I was like,
you were figuring things out. You were finding your voice.
Yeah,
almost.
I was changing style, and weirdly, I think the first thing I ever did for Matt, the first thing I actually ever did for 2000 AD, is probably closer to my style now. Than a lot of the stuff I did kind of in between, where I was jumping around all over the place, trying different ways of inking, different ways of colouring. So I don't really mind. I'm quite happy if people just look at Clean Room and go, oh, he just did Clean Room. He like literally came from nowhere. I'm like, I'm fine with that, really.
You're like, wow, this guy is really fully formed right from the start.
I totally am. Yeah, totally.
Yo, everybody. I want to take a quick break from the show to talk about my friends over at Super Context. Super Context is a weekly podcast autopsy of media, how we consume it, and how it informs our everyday culture. Each episode looks at research into the production and distribution of film, television, literature, music, or comics, even comics journalism in an episode I guested on, all while exploring how modern entertainment represents humanity and contributes to our collective identity. Fancy! Super Context is available on Apple Podcast, Overcast, Google Play, Stitcher, and other podcast platforms, as well as their landing page at supercontextpodcast.libsyn.com. And now, back to Off Panel. So, you're currently working on the Wildstorm with Warren Ellis.
Yeah.
For listeners that don't know, it is a book that is reimagining the Wildstorm universe, aka, WildCATs, Stormwatch, all of the, John Lynch is coming, my boy John Lynch. There's all kinds of, there's even a planetary reference in the most recent issue, a very small planetary reference. From what I understand, Kieran Gillen was your Cupid, the one who brought you guys together. How did that first come together?
Yeah, so literally, I haven't ever met or spoken to Kieran Gillen either.
Oh, that's hilarious.
Kieran Gillen, but I owe him, pints and pints and pints. So He basically he spoke to Warren and sort of showed him clean room, and Warren was looking for. He had a type of artist, I think, in mind for the book because he wanted something that was very grounded, and it just so happened that clean room clicked. But the first thing I knew of it was we were on holiday at the time, and I was doing clean room, and I was already trying to think about what to do next because I knew clean room was going to come to sort of an end. And I got an email from Marie Javins at DC just saying, I have a project. I can't tell you what it is. It's like secret, but if you email me to say that you're interested, then I can sort of tell you what it is. Who are your favorite writers? What type of writers do you like? So I sent her an email back saying, oh, okay, I'm really interested. I had no idea what it was. I said, my favorite writers are, people like, and I put Warren Ellis, Grant Morrison, Jonathan Hickman. Not as a like, I would like to work with one of these people, but just to cut those, that's the type of stuff that I like.
Right.
And then she mailed me straight back saying, oh, that's good, because how would you like to work on a complete revamp of the Wildstorm universe written by Warren Ellis, which is definitely the most weird, bizarre email I've ever had. Just to get my head, I think it took me about a year to get my head fully around it.
Yeah.
It just seems so, like when we were talking before we started recording that, both of us went traveling after uni. So when I went traveling, Planetary was kind of coming out. And no matter where we went in the world, I would seek out a comic book shop and then I would get the latest issue of Planetary. And I literally carried 5 or 6 issues of Planetary completely around, like, as I circumnavigated the globe because I didn't want to miss out on them. That book was so key, and the Authority run as well they were so key. I mean, Frank Quitely was one of my favorite artists, and his run after Hitch's run, which was fantastic. But when Mark Miller took over from Warren, and then they carried on the Authority, that it was just such a fantastic book. The WildCATs, the first issue of the WildCATs that Travis Charest did as well, is my kind of all-time favorite single comic book issue. I was a huge fan of the universe, obviously, when Jim first started it as well, because I was a huge fan of Jim from X-Men. Yeah, so if someone had said to me at that point, you could do anything you want in the world, like anything at all, be it rock star, movie star, I would have said, I want to draw comics and I'd like to work with Warren Ellis and do like the Authority or do what. So to finally have an email like sort of a decade later that gives you that opportunity is just bizarre.
Yeah.
It's weird about it now. Do you know what I mean? It's just so weird. So I had to resist basically just sending Warren loads of gushing fanboy emails. I had to try and be like quite sort of cool about it. Well, I probably failed spectacularly. And so I said, well, I'll definitely do that then. But then she was like, well, hang on, hold your horses. You need to try out for it. So I then had to do loads of design sketches for all the characters. And actually, funny enough, we'd been on holiday, and on the last day of holiday, I put my back out. Basically, I had a back injury that I got from traveling, and I put my back out. So I had to drive home. I was in like loads of pain. I was dosed up on loads of painkillers. And then I had 2 days to do all these character designs. But in a way, because it was just, I was in so much pain, I sort of didn't think about it too much. I sort of just went with instinct. My wife and I sat down, went through loads of ideas, and I just went for I completely revamped them. I mean, Warren gave me some kind of idea of what he wanted. I just kind of ran with it, basically.
Yeah.
And luckily, he liked it, really. But it's weird. I think if I'd been more healthy at the time, I would have thought about it a bit more and probably just scared myself shitless.
That's
and
funny.
Not being able to do anything.
That actually, that makes a lot of sense. It's like, sometimes you're better off when you're distracted slightly. Ideally, not by like horrific back pain, but at least it takes you away from like overthinking things and thinking about, oh my God, I'm trying to redefine a universe that was created and developed by people like Jim Lee and Travis Charest and Frank Quitely and Brian Hitch and et cetera. I mean, even Tom Rainey was an underrated
because
part
they're
of it.
all. Yeah, well, and they're all such good artists as well. This is the other thing. They're all so good that if I'd had more time almost to think about things, I would have freaked out. It would have been like the sort of burden would have been too much. But instead, as it was, I had sort of no time because I'd had to like drive back, and so I just rattled through them as quick as I could. and then just sent them off. And luckily, yeah, they went down. But if I'd had too much, if I'd had weeks to think about it, I think I would have got myself in such a ginormous state.
Yeah. When was that?
That would have been, 2 years ago.
Man.
Yeah, two years ago. Yeah.
So you've had time to like kind of properly kind of develop this.
Yeah, so once I handed in the initial sketches, Warren didn't hate them. He liked a couple of them, and then he requested some changes on the others. And then I spent about 4 or 5 weeks just doing character designs and just and then experimenting with the way I wanted the world to look and the way I was going to draw it. Warren had written the first 6 scripts up front.
Mm-hmm.
Pardon me. So that was really good as well in terms of just thinking about what I could do with. Because Warren was very clear about he only wanted to use specific 9 and 6 panel grids, which was cool. You know, that, in some ways that kind of helped me because it gave a very clear style for how the book should look.
Sure.
But then I wanted to kind of do as much as I could within that to kind of make that stand out from what people had done before. So I immediately went and got like Watchmen, and then I went and got the Tom King, the series that
Omega Man or Vision?
Yes, Omega Man. Yeah. So again, that freaked me out a little bit as well because I went back through Watchmen. I was like, oh bloody hell, this is incredibly good. But then I tried to think, okay, what else could we do within this format? So that's when I came up with the idea of like breaking panels down even further into like smaller panels. Mm-hmm. And I played around a lot with that, refined the characters a lot, worked on kind of what the world was going to look like. And then I just started in drawing the first issue about 6 or 7 weeks after I knew I had the gig, and then I started on sort of issue 1. Mm-hmm. And then I've just been on it really. I've been doing some game stuff in between, but about 6 months ago, I completely stepped away from games for the time being to concentrate just on this because I just want to this to work out. So yeah.
When you were initially going into those designs, did you have like any guidance? Like, I mean, this book is interesting because I think it's funny that Warren has had an opportunity to like redefine his universe basically twice, and he went completely different feels both times. The first time was much more superhero angled. This time it's much more kind of like espionage, paranoia type Cold War between Skywatch and international operations. Did you have kind of guidance that they were going for more of a plain clothes like espionage feel?
Yeah, totally. Warren did like a design Bible basically, where he said he'd do a brief description of the characters, but then more than that, he would he sort of how he wanted the world to feel. And first of all, he wanted it to be the opposite of what had gone before. So anything that had kind of been done before, spandex, all tight-fitting costumes, that was immediately out. And he wanted everything to look real. And then I kind of took that away, and then I thought, okay, well, if it's going to look real, and this was quite cool because this is where the sort of games design thing comes in. I wrote independent little sort of character design sheets for each of the characters, like how they would have got to the point where they were. Like if their costumes are going to be clothes, where would they have bought them from? Why would they have bought them? How would then that affect kind of the way that they are, like the way that they stand, the way that they move around in scenes and everything. So Grifter was the first one I did. He came really quickly because essentially I just thought, okay, he would go and buy all his stuff from Army Navy stores, or he'd get it online in bulk order so it couldn't be traced. And then, so could I put a costume together that was literally what you could go out and buy, like off the peg? So he came together really quickly. And then I started working on the engineer. She took longer, I think, because my initial designs for her weren't far enough away from what the engineer looked like. I did have her initially a lot sleeker.
You mean in terms of like in proper engineer form, not in Angie form?
Yeah, sorry, in proper Angie. Yeah, her Angie form, that came really quickly because that I just used because essentially she's like a computer engineer, and working in games, I've worked with lots of lots of guys and girls who work within that industry. So I kind of knew the way that she would probably dress and the way she would hold herself and stuff. So she came easily as her own, as Angela Spicker, but it was more difficult getting the armor. Also, the hard thing with the armor, which I realized very quickly, is it's really hard to do armor that hasn't already sort of been done. Do you know what I mean? Like, because so you start drawing stuff, and almost immediately you're like, well, that looks like Iron Man. So you can't do that. So then you do something else, and you're like, well, that just looks like Optimus Prime. So in the end, it was Warren actually had a good idea. He said, because I started to make her look slightly more kind of avian look. I was looking at animal forms. So I was looking at lizards. I was looking at birds. And then he said, he mentioned like crows are considered to be like the engineers of the bird world, because there's strains of crows that can actually found to have tool building abilities. And as soon as he said that, I was like, right, that's what we're going to do. So I then developed her more along a kind of a bird sort of form. That's where she got the aerofoils, and that's why her helmet's more kind of like beak-like, more sort of avian looking. And then what I did a lot of research into current exoskeleton tech and robotic tech, and just tried to put her suit together from a functional point of view. So I was really pleased with how she came out. And then when she appeared, some people were like, oh, it just looks like the Predator mixed with the Transformer. And I was like, yeah, it does kind of look a bit like Predator mixed with the Transformer. But that wasn't my intent.
You know, I kind of got like an Egyptian vibe, or Egyptian god vibe from it. It's almost kind of like Anubis or like Osiris in there. Like in terms of the face, at least. And I thought that was, especially in her more raw form, because like the latest issue had her like more like fully formed version of herself. But I think that's great. Yeah. But I'm kind of curious, like this easily could turn into like an old school Wildstorm fan club, but at the same time, like I think people kind of forget how good the stuff was, just because a lot of people kind of toss away the original Image stuff because they viewed it as derivative or viewed it as whatever. But the Wildstorm stuff, there was a lot of great comics in there. When you dove into that, when you dove into this project, did you basically effectively throw all that into the trash? Like just because like you wanted to ignore it, you wanted it out of your brain.
Yeah, what I did for every character I sort of redesigned is I didn't have images of them in their original forms open at any point when I was drawing stuff. So what I did was I would go off Warren's description, and then I would kind of have a very quick Google search to remind myself what the characters looked like, but then I wouldn't look at them. So that way, that if I did have any sort of callback, that callback almost came sort of from secondary memory, so that I knew I wasn't going to be accurately replicating anything. So like when I did, I drew Grifter's mask is ever so slightly, it's different. The way I drew it is different to how Jim Lee originally did it. And actually, I like the way I actually like Jim's design for it, the eyes and everything. But my version's a lot simpler because it's kind of a remembered version of that. And I thought as well, if he's made this, it would almost be sort of simplified. It would just be the black stripes and then just the eye things. And I did that with, other things, other elements as well. So he has got pockets on the front of his combat vest, because, like pockets was such a big, like pouches and pockets was such a big sort of 90s thing, but they're just sort of there a little bit. They're not kind of overblown. And there's other elements in the characters as well that I kind of tried to carry. Interestingly, I've just done a redesign for a character who will be appearing in issue 14. That's an existing character. And for her, there is a callback to the colours that were originally used, but her costume's completely different to how that originally was as well. So I think you can see little bits in all of them, but equally they're intentionally completely different, if you know what I mean.
I have to say the first issue with the very first scene with Zealot or Lucy Blaze having her dot that was blood being removed from it, I feel like that was a very, very good metaphorical like this ain't your papa's Wildstorm comics moment. It was really nice.
Yeah, that was that was down to Warren, because that was in the script, and as soon as I read it as well, I was like, okay, that's reaffirming exactly what we're going for here. Because it was a bit nervy as well to sort of do this. It's weird, you sort of do it in isolation, and I'd redesign these characters, and I'd be like, oh, I'm really pleased with how that looks, and then later I would go and look at Jim's original drawings and stuff, and I'd be like, oh boy, these are really different, even more than I sort of remember. I hope people are okay with that. You know what I mean? Particularly,
sure.
I hope Jim's okay with it. You know what I mean? Because I'm basically like taking his characters and just very blasely just redrawing them, redesigning them, and like I hope he's like okay with this. But I thought, I mean, a lot of it is detail. Like Warren laid out, right, this is what this person's going to be wearing. This is how they're going to act. So I was like, well, it must be okay. It must be okay, right? I'll just do it.
Well, I mean, there are characters that are just massively different, like Spartan. I honestly, I'm not gonna lie,
Yeah.
I didn't even realize that was Spartan until like a couple issues in, and I was just like, why does John Colt sound familiar?
I know.
And then like I loved Jackson King becoming a woman. Like that was a great change. But it is interesting because it's like there's like all these nods. I do think it's funny that the one thing that stayed the same was that Grifter does still have a mask, even if it isn't totally the same.
Well, I think some things are just so iconic,
Right.
Whereas I think other things, it's almost like, I mean, because like John Colt is, like you say, Spartan is completely different in terms of his like character as well. Like in the original WildCATs, he was quite he was almost like the Cyclops of the team.
He was like the Cyclops if he actually was a robot, as opposed to just seeming like a robot.
Yeah. Whereas now he's like, he's like quite sort of not flashy, but because he's essentially like almost a James Bond style
He's
character.
a rogue. He's like a scoundrel.
He totally. And like he's awesome. I really like him actually, because again, a lot of the characters have. Oh, hang on, sorry.
What's that?
It's just my computer trying to restart, but I'm not going to let it. So annoying. There we go. What's great as well is Warren will not only detail how a character sort of looks, he will give a real idea of their character, and then I try to really get that into the poses and their kind of body language and what they're doing in the background when other people are talking, because I think that's the type of stuff I enjoy reading when artists do that. Like I love Frank Quitely's work as much. The second read through, where you go through and you notice the sort of actions that happen in the background as a result of someone saying something or doing something. I love all that sort of stuff. So I really try to get character across that way as well.
I kind of got a Ambrose Chase vibe from John Colt, which I think is.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, neither of you guys are going for a one-for-one overlap, but in that, I don't know. That's a compliment, though. Anytime you can compare yourself to Planetary, that's a very good thing.
Oh yeah. Planetary was so amazing, wasn't it?
It really was.
I think Planetary is my probably favourite comic book of all time. But it's a hard one to have as well, because you can give it to someone who doesn't know anything about comics and they will enjoy it because it's really well written. But you really have to know your comics to really enjoy it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, it's not just comics either. Like there's like all the pulp stuff and everything like that kind of ties into it. And I mean, there's the Godzilla stuff. It's kind of like a dissection of pop culture in some ways, but mostly through the prism of comics.
Yeah, totally. There's some great issues. That one issue where it's set in set in London, and there's all these 80s style Vertigo characters there. And at the end, the main character, he like steps into the shadows and he takes his jacket off. You see that he's got the same tattoos as Spider.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
stuff like that. You're just like, this is so awesome, but then you realise you can't explain that awesomeness to someone that doesn't have all of the same references.
Right. They appreciate it because it's a good story, but not for the same reasons you do. But so the last thing I want to talk about is your process on the book. So like, what you get a script. What is your process going from getting the script to passing it off to Steve Buccellato, who by the way is like a perfect compliment for your work.
Oh, he is amazing. He's like my favorite person after my wife and children. Steve's he's just a legend. He has made the book look so fantastic, and and that is he comes with loads of ideas and because I had a real idea for how I wanted the book to be colored.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted it to be very natural. I wanted the use of light to make a big difference, and like I wanted people's clothes to look very real and stuff. But then Steve does all that, but then on top of that, he just layers in so much detail and depth to kind of the colouring, and makes individual panels pop so much. He's just a Fantastic. But yeah, so my process, but basically the script comes in, and then I spend normally a day doing all the thumbnails. My thumbnails now are frankly terrible. I mean, they're just. I apologize every time I send them in with a quick email. I apologize for how bad they are. On issue 1, they were sort of okay. They were passable. They were still really rough, but as we've gone further on with each issue, and I kind of get more relaxed, letting them see my terrible scribbles. And I think Marie and Diego, who's the assistant editor, is more trustworthy of the pages won't look anything like this.
Right.
I just bash them out, basically. I mean, for me, they're just important so I know who's in each panel and the rough kind of size distribution and the angle of shots across the page. So I know the composition of the page is working.
How big are you doing those, roughly speaking?
They're tiny, so they are probably the size of. So I'm just holding up my hands. And I realize
I can see it. Nobody else can though.
Yeah, probably like an A5 piece of paper, so they'll be like about that.
Okay.
And each one of those is a page. So I'll scribble them out. I'll spend, and I normally do them very quickly because I sort of have quite a instant idea of the scene and what objects, what the environment's like, and where the characters are. And once I've got that for the first panel, then it's very easy for me to kind of think about how they're moving around the scene after that first panel. Mm-hmm. If it's an action sequence, though, that takes me a lot longer. So what I wanted to do with the action sequences in the Wildstorm is really play around with time and show all the details of kind of movements and destruction and stuff. And to do that, I have to really plan out very carefully what the environment is and how everyone's going to move around the environment and what they're doing when they're not in shot and what the repercussions are for different actions. A lot probably unnecessarily, because most people aren't paying that much attention. But I like to just have all that stuff in there. So it's like little things like in issue 3, there was a big fight scene. There's an explosion that opens that action sequence up where the doors of the bunker get blown off and the razors come in. And I worked out from the explosion, a result of the explosion, where all the various bits of furniture would get scattered to and then what they would be lying on and how that would look. But again, I mean, probably, I could have just drawn that randomly in every panel, but I was really insistent that it would be accurate in each panel.
Yeah.
So I do that. Some of the fight sequences take, like the fight sequence in issue 9, the samurai, that took me in and of itself. That fight sequence took me a whole day to work out. But once that's done, I send them off. They get okayed. They come back to me. Normally, I send them off in the evening, and by the morning, they're all okay. And then I just start drawing. I'll pick a page at random. I'll try not to start with page 1. That was a thing that Shelley always told me as well. Like, never draw the book page 1 to 22, because if the schedule does hit and you have to make some cutbacks in terms of your, quality, people will see a degradation of art as they go through the book. So she said, start randomly and start on an easy page and then go to difficult pages and do those first. You've spent, you make sure they're all right. So that's what I tend to do.
I've never heard that before. That is really that makes sense.
Yeah, because I mean, you can see when people don't do that. You can read a comic and you can actually see the art. Those last few pages tail up, because all of us would love to spend as much time as we could and get it looking right. But ultimately, you are always on a schedule, and sometimes life gets in the way or circumstances out of your control, and you have to get something done quicker than you would like. And this way, you're kind of jumbling all that in. I mean, I've been fortunate that hasn't really happened on this. I've had enough time to always take my time, but I have on previous stories had to go eek. But luckily, it's like page 11 that's a bit shoddy and not page 22. Mm-hmm. So then I start drawing, and basically my working day is get up, put Netflix on, and I'll draw through. I listen to podcasts, listen to music maybe if I fancy mixing it up, and I will rough out a page very, very quickly because I ink my own stuff. My pencils aren't really pencils; they're more like sort of spotty layouts, really. I might sort of really concentrate if I'm doing like some hands that are really complicated or a particular crowd scene. I'll sort of pencil that in quite accurately, or add quite a lot of detail rather. But for the majority of the stuff, I won't. I'll just make sure it works compositionally on the page, and that what I've included in the thumbnail actually works. Because sometimes as well, I'll draw something in thumbnail, and then when I actually come to draw it out properly, I'll be like, oh, if I use proper proportions, that figure does not fit anymore.
Right.
So then I might have to change a panel slightly. And then I'll just go through an ink, and I'll do a page a day. Basically, I always hit a page a day. And that's it.
So do you feel like, like I know some artists who say like the inking phase is the most important part for them, and then other people who say that like almost like the thumbnailing is the most important part because that's when you're figuring out all the storytelling, and it's like the most arduous mental part. Like, what is there a part that you kind of view as like the most important part of your specific alchemy, or is it just kind of all equally important?
Gosh, that's really good. I think the thumbnailing is probably the most important from a storytelling point of view, because that's when you are making it. That's when you're really thinking about stuff.
Right.
It's when
problem solving.
You're problem solving, and that's where you'll notice mistakes. And that's when you should double check. That you have read that script right. So in some ways, I think that is really the most important. But if you see the thumbnails, they're so far away from the final inks. It feels weird saying that's the most important, because you certainly wouldn't want to hand your thumbnails in.
Right.
People would not pay like $4 for that. I sort of I sort of enjoy it all equally, and I think it's all, I guess, is important as each other, because ultimately the final inks is what really sells, the book, and sells not sells the book, but from an artwork point of view,
it kind of defines it for a lot of people.
Yeah, totally. And that's where you can have the most fun as well. Depends what you're drawing. Sometimes I'll draw a scene and I'm really enjoying doing the drawing. And then I'm pleased with the final result. Sometimes I'll draw a scene and I'm like not actually enjoying what I'm drawing, but it's worth it to get the final bit. So for instance, like in issue 9, I did just a single panel that was basically New York, and it was New York in the rain.
Mm-hmm.
And that was not actually fun to draw, because I just must have drawn billions of little tiny lines.
Mm-hmm.
But I knew that it would be worth it once I got to the end, or hoped it would be worth it once I got to the end. So it's weird. The drawing phase can be weird. Sometimes it can be out and out completely enjoyable. Sometimes you almost put your brain into autopilot because you're drawing like leaves, or you're drawing raindrops, or you're drawing something that you just got to keep doing the same thing over and over again to kind of get to.
Yeah, absolutely. I do think I always find that everybody's process is to be really interesting, especially given how they value different things. So like I've had 2 people I've had on my show. Jeff Darrow was on my show, and we talked about I don't know if you've ever seen his pencils, but his pencils are unbelievable. Like everything you see on the page is done in pencils. It's like fully lined out and everything like that. And he has a book. A book of just his pencils. Is called Lead Poisoning. It's really interesting just because you can see like the level of detail he gets on that, and like everything is realized on there. And then you have somebody like Chris Samnee, who is like widely considered to be one of the best artists in comics these days, and his pencils are just rough, just completely rough, like non-formed beasts, and then everything is solved in inks in the ink phase. And I do think it's kind of interesting how that works. It's just like it's partially to taste and to how you work, but it's like there's also like just it says a lot about the personality in some ways as to how you work, because like when I was asking like Jeff about his pencils, like basically like, could you ever do it some other way? Could you ever just like do that in ink so you don't have to do this twice? And he's just like, I can't. It's just how I do it, basically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's amazing, because I saw a friend of mine's got, in fact I think it's Lee actually. Lee has he's got hard boiled, but a version of that which is like massive. It's like oversized.
Oh,
it's
like the artist edition or something.
Size. Yeah, and it's got, I don't think it's his pencils, but it's definitely not coloured, so it's all just inks, and it's just unbelievable. But to think that he's literally drawn that twice is just, I don't think I'm sort of built that way to do that. I think, but then I think I do I mean, I do love drawing, and I love the ink. Like when a page particularly is coming together, it's really hard to stop because you feel so pleased by it, and you're having such a good time drawing it, and then you're sticking in so much detail because I'm a sucker for detail as well. I love drawing detail and things. But I tend to solve all my problems in inks. Also, I work digitally as well, so a benefit I have is if I make a mistake, I can rub it out an infinite amount of times without any degradation to the paper.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know how Jeff works, but I'm assuming if I was an artist who was working, permanently on a physical copy, I would want to be more certain probably of what I was putting down, my pencils to make it more certain for me. So when I came to the ink phase, but because I'm not, I can digitally, I can, tweak things, I can mess around with stuff. It probably made me completely cavalier, really. Lazy. I'm lazy.
That's another thing. Like that's another can of worms is like the traditional digital switch. It's like the pluses and minuses between the two of them. But I mean, you came up working digitally in video games, so I mean, it wouldn't make a lot of sense for you to go back to traditional there, I feel.
Yeah, I mean, I still draw on my own time, like traditionally.
Right.
But I don't have a particular affinity the way that I know friends of mine who work traditionally. They are like, I don't know how you, I don't, yeah, totally. And they're like, I don't know how you can draw, digitally. It's just not the same. They literally don't enjoy drawing digitally. But because I started using a Wacom sort of 2004, 2005. That wasn't like a Cintiq. That was just like a tablet. And then I moved on to Cintiqs about about 6 or 7 years ago. And I just, I enjoy it. And a lot of people I work with as well, if I go into video games, they all use Cintiqs. And I think if you're around people that are always using Cintiqs and therefore they're pushing digital painting on, and I mean, I see some stuff that comes out of like video game concept art, which is just unbelievable. Because there are things that you can do now digitally that are just, that you just couldn't recreate. Old school. But in saying that, I see some of the stuff that Jim puts out on his Instagram, or I see like, some like Brian Hitch stuff. And I'm like, wow, that is incredible. And it does have, I do think you can tell the difference between digital and physical. But I just, I don't sort of mind that the differences are there, and I prefer working. I prefer working digitally.
Yeah, I think it comes down to comfort, and it's like whatever you're most comfortable with, and I think that helps a lot. But so to close, I want to ask 5 questions about you, Jon Davis-Hunt, the person. These will mostly be. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, sorry. These will probably be like ever so boring answers, but I'll try and like.
No, I'm gonna try and make them fun. I'll try to make them fun.
Okay, cool, man.
These will mostly be about your great love of comics and video games, because as you note on your website, they're not just your jobs. They're also your hobbies. And so I want to talk about something tangentially connected to your past designing video games. As near as I can tell, pretty much everything that you have credits on officially were car racing video games.
Yeah, I've made 11, or is it 12? 11 or 12 racing video games. Yeah.
Okay. So my question is kind of a cheat. It's kind of a conditional 2-in-1. All right. If you're actually a racing fan, what's your favorite kind of racing? And if you're not a racing fan, how did you survive all of that racing?
So yeah, I mean, I've always liked racing video games, but I wouldn't say they're my standout favorite genre ever.
I meant like racing in life, like in do you watch like Formula One or
no, I've never been so I didn't grow up being a particular petrol head. I mean, I've always liked cars, and I liked Transformers originally because for Transformers I liked cars, and then now these are cars that transform into robots kind of thing. But yeah, I wasn't huge, but making car video games, I sort of got into motorsport, but I don't really like F1. I've never been F1 head. I always preferred the more sort of aggressive kind of Robin is racing kind of series. So like I'm a big fan of like the Australian the V8 series, which is awesome. The German DTM's really cool. Over here we have like a British thing called the BTCC. That's a good series. But yeah, I'm not really a massive petrol head, but growing up, one of my favorite games of all time was probably Ridge Racer in the
Oh
arcade.
yeah, it was so good.
I mean, so I remember going in with a load of mates. We were on holiday at the time. We'd all gone down to the coast. Would have been about, I guess it must be about 14 or 15, and finding this guy. And it had no like no one told you. There were no instructions explaining how to drift.
Mm-hmm.
But I can just remember after playing it, for best part of an hour, all of us had worked out, hit the brake, back on the accelerator, swing the wheel, and you could just do these epic drifts. And that was just like amazing. So I've got fond memories of that. But yeah, it wasn't like I worked in a studio. We made a racing game. I then went off and made some other games. But then my first job as a designer was in a racing studio. And really, it was a challenge, really, of kind of making racing games. Not necessarily something that I had a massive interest in, but just I got really involved in it. And so, yeah, that's what I've sort of always made, really.
All right. Yeah, that's awesome. So we started this podcast talking about a comic I wish more people read in WildCATs Aliens. What is a comic you wished more people read that you in particular are fond of?
Oh, gosh, that is a hard question. So the one I would always say to people is Domu, The Dreams of Children, which is a Katsuhiro Otomo book he did prior to Akira, which is probably my favorite comic of all time, actually, which is just amazing. Have you read it at all?
No. Are you talking about the Domo or Domu, or are you talking about Akira?
No, talking about.
I mean, for your favorite one all time.
I think Domu's better. Well, I wouldn't say it's better than Akira. It's just so awesome. I think it's shorter. It's only a single volume, and it's a much smaller scale story. It's basically about a little girl who moves into an apartment block in Tokyo, and there's this old guy there who has psionic powers, basically, and he's killing people, causing people to kill each other. But this small girl, she has powers as well, and they end up having this ginormous, just epic fight, basically, that lasts for about 150 pages, where they're just blowing stuff up and flinging kind of bricks and roof tiles at each other and shattering gas mains, and it's just absolutely incredible. And but I don't think most people have. Obviously, everyone's heard of Akira,
right?
But go back and check out Domu. It is phenomenal. It's so good.
I will do that. I've never heard of that, but that sounds amazing.
Yeah, it is. It's absolutely, it's brilliant. It's brilliantly written. It's fantastically drawn. What I love about it is it carries all that. It's as good as Akira, but it's such a small scale story because it literally occurs just in this single apartment block. I think there's a few scenes actually that happen in a police station, but the rest is a single apartment block. But it's so well. His shots are so well framed, and so many panels just work so well individually, and it's this use of the environment that I guess would have been around him at the time. It's just set in the Tokyo suburbs. They're used to such great effect. Yeah, it's a brilliant book.
That's awesome. So next question: if you had to pick one type of game, I know you worked a lot in racing games, but shooters, RPGs, fighting games, racing games, adventure games, platformers, whatever, to play exclusively, what would your pick be?
That's hard. So what, a single genre or
a single genre?
Oh, a single genre. Gosh, that's hard. I mean, I do love racing games, and I'm very, and I feel almost like I should. Let's say I can't pick racing games.
Okay, let's say you can't pick racing games. Yeah.
So I would probably. I'm going to be. Sounds like the obvious choice, but I think I'd have to go first-person shooter, right? For the breadth of what you get then, because you get all the good stuff, like the obvious things, like your Dooms and your Quakes and your Far Cries and at the moment I'm playing PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds, which is so buggy and such a mess of a game, but yet also so absolutely amazing and immersive and brilliant. It's such a weird game because I played it the other night and with a friend of mine, and we literally spent 30 minutes just lying flat on a balcony, not doing anything, while other people were like running around, in and out of buildings trying to find us.
That's hilarious.
So I was and although part of my brain was like, you are literally not doing anything here. I mean, I was barely even touching the controller, and yet it was so nail-bitingly brilliant.
Yeah,
it was amazing. So
Wait, really quick. Have you? Sorry, really quick. Have you played Fortnite at all?
Yeah, so my son is he's almost 9, and he is addicted to Fortnite. Basically, I actually have to like I'm trying to be a good. So it's hard because I love games, you see. So I'm quite happy for him to be like a gamer, but I don't let him game probably as much as I would have liked to have done when I was 9.
Right.
You got to do other stuff, but yeah, him and all his friends love Fortnite.
I played one of like the ones where it's like there's 100 people playing and everybody's trying to get each other, and
Yeah.
I like everyone all went straight for like the weapon areas, and I'm like, I'm gonna go over to this nice chill looking area and I'm just gonna run around for a while, and I managed to survive until like the final 5 despite the fact I literally didn't kill anyone because
Nice.
I was
Nice.
basically just like surviving, and I was like hanging out in
Oh.
barns and doing stuff like that, and it was actually super tense. I was like stressed
Yeah,
out while
exactly.
doing it, but just because, kind of like you're saying with like the prone, like when you're just like laying on a building, it's like it is kind of interesting because it's like it brings a survival element to it. It's like you're not necessarily looking to do anything like murderous. You're just like, I just want to be the last one standing.
I totally, and also once you start hiding as well, and you survive for a period of time, then you're like, well, this tactic is working. Like I daren't change it, like change up now.
Right.
Like I've committed to this cowardice as an effective tactic for surviving, so I'm going to stick with it. But yeah, it's so good. Have you played PlayerUnknown at all?
I haven't. No. The
Oh,
only
you
reason why I
should play
played,
it. I mean, it seems so. Have you got an Xbox or a PC?
I have an Xbox.
Yeah, so I mean, it's shockingly bad in terms of like the actual like the frame rate
Right.
and the like the bugs. I mean, coming from Fortnite, it's going to be a massive step down, but I would say it is more immersive than Fortnite. I mean, I love Fortnite as well; it's really good, but what PlayerUnknown gives you is the settings obviously much more realistic, but also the scope is much more realistic. So the whole thing you just mentioned about going off somewhere and kind of hiding, but in Fortnite you get grouped together quite quickly. In PlayerUnknown you can literally jump in a car and then drive to the opposite side of the island.
That's awesome.
And really be alone. But then when you're then driving back, you're so aware that everyone can hear this really loud car that you're driving in, like with weapons. So then you get out, and then you're just running across like open fields. Oh, it's amazing! So good.
Yeah, no. The only reason why I even played Fortnite was because they had like a free like beta or something like that, and I was like, oh, I want to try this out because I heard good things, and I tried it out and it was great. And I'm like, now I want to play PlayerUnknown, but I haven't had the chance yet. We'll get to what games like are your hot ones, but I have to admit I'm like horrifically addicted to Overwatch, and I basically have been since it came out.
Oh,
and
I love it. Who's your main?
my main is actually mostly Diva.
Oh yeah, so I can't really get to grips with Diva the whole because I watch other people play her, and I can't do the whole have my special ready, fire it up into the air, sort of effectively jump out and then get back into a Diva. I tend to like waste it. Like I'll fire out to just charge right past everyone into a wall that's like miles away. Just I'm so completely ineffective.
I would say like 50% of the time I get like nobody, but then the other 50% of the time I somehow get 3 or 4. So it's like I feel like in on average I'm a upper level like ultimate user when it comes to Diva. But I play her, and I play Symmetra, and I play Mercy, and Pharah used to be my main, but I don't play her as much anymore just because she just gets totally wrecked. She's really fun though. I like all the characters. That's the thing that really amazes me about that game is how they made a game where literally every character feels completely unique, but also like super enjoyable to play.
Oh, have you got? I'll show you this. Have you got this yet?
Is that the Art of Overwatch?
Yeah.
I did get it. Yeah,
So awesome.
it's really amazing.
Yeah,
I could go on about Overwatch for forever, so let's move on to the next one. The next question is, obviously, Wildstorm artists of years past are a big influence. We've talked about Tomo, we've talked about a lot of people, but is there an influence, not just in comics, that people would be really shocked to like find, or like, are you a huge Caravaggio guy or something?
Gosh, no, I'm not really. My influences are really they're 99% comic book really. I mean, I do. There are a lot of concept artists that I really like, but I mean, I I most of the time, Katsuhiro Otomo is probably my go-to. I just think his stuff was so ahead of its time. I mean, Akira was done in the 80s, and it's just phenomenal. But I really I like a lot of French artists. I get a lot of the humanoid books. Because I discovered Mobius when I was sort of about 12, 13, and that blew my mind. So I've always enjoyed French comic books, but I don't have any really out there sort of left field influences really.
No, that's totally legit. I mean, and I feel like Otomo has been like obviously Akira is huge and everything like that, but I feel like that influence has been popping up a lot more in like the last generation or so of artists. Like it seems like really a big influence these days.
Yeah, well, I think he did. I mean, I love his. He was so good at kind of form within environments. Like everything he draws looks so solid and so planted, but also his like attention to detail as well, and his scene setting. His environment stuff is just incredible, and I always love that. I love the way that things look, not only physically like correct in terms of like proportions and scale and perspective, but the way that his attention to detail, like his machinery looks functional and makes you think about, that's what that would really look like. You know, he doesn't kind of have a shorthand for technology. He goes out and researches what things actually look like and how they would actually work and function. And then also his just graphic design, like individual panels are so well laid out. Mm-hmm. It's just fantastic. I mean, it must have almost killed him to do Akira, because I know I've got several of his books, and for a 7 or 8 year period, it didn't seem like he did anything apart from just stay in and draw Akira.
I'm always amazed by a lot of the manga creators just in how like the volume of what they're producing. Like Naoki Urasawa, like he was basically always doing 2 books at once, and I'm like, how? I mean, I know he had assistants and everything, but still, like they were great, and they still felt like him. And I don't know, that dude was a wizard.
Yeah, and I think having a body of work like that as well is just so satisfying. I mean, that's another reason why I like French comics as well. When you go to, like a French comic book shop, and all the albums are there, and they're all oversized, hardback, beautifully presented. The guys that do them have had like 2 years to just concentrate on those 120 pages, and they keep them in print for decades at a time, and build up fan base over that time period as well. I think that's such a lovely model for kind of comic art. I mean, it's like the American market isn't quite like that, although that's started to happen more. I think one of the benefits of the rise of graphic novels, as they get called, or trades, although some people decry them because it leads to
trade weighting,
it affects the sale. Yeah, but I think from a creator point of view, it's so nice to kind of have that collection of like a story and that body of work that represents, sometimes 2, 3, 4, 5 years of your life, but have it all there as a complete story. I think that's really, really awesome.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely agree. So the last question I have for you is, based off of our conversation, I'm presuming that you are effectively the world's foremost expert on Netflix.
I watch a lot of Netflix.
What from Netflix would you recommend that most people, that you feel like people haven't necessarily watched? Like for example, like Dark is something that I feel like a fair amount of people watch, but at the same time, it sounds like something I'd really like. But what's something outside the box that you've come across where you're like, more people should watch this?
I tell you a film that one of my favorite films. It's on Netflix. Have you watched Warrior with Tom Hardy and Joel?
Yes, that is excellent.
So so many people I talk to have not seen that film, or they've like started it but they haven't got all the way through, and I'm like, you've got to watch it all the way through. It's amazing. But as for series that are on there, everyone's got to watch The Thick of It, because it's the best comedy series ever made.
I have never seen The Thick of It, but I have seen, oh my God, what is the name of the movie?
In the Loop.
I've seen In the Loop. I haven't seen The Thick of It, which is funny because Capaldi as Malcolm is just like amazing.
So basically, The Thick of It is a series. It's In the Loop as a series, but it's if you like In the Loop, you'll like The Thick of It. But in some ways, The Thick of It's even better because obviously it's longer, so there's more, sort of that more story arcs in there and stuff. And some of the characters are just incredible. Particularly in like season 3 is just stunning. So that's really good. Recent stuff I've watched. I'm watching La Mante at the moment, which is a French series about a serial killer called The Mantis. That's amazing. That's absolutely brilliant. What else is really good? God.
I do want to make a quick Capaldi comment. I think it's really funny that he's most famous for playing a guy who never stops cussing, and then a guy who basically never stops being a good dude. Like,
yeah, I know.
He's like Doctor Who and Capaldi, or in Malcolm. Like, those are two diametrically opposite characters.
I know. He's such an amazing. I mean, it'll be interesting to see what he does next. Whether or not he kind of, plays to the strengths that he had in Doctor Who and stays mainstream, or whether he goes off and does something a bit more sort of left field. I know there's loads of pressure on Armando Iannucci to do another series of The Thick of It, but he's sort of flatly denied, which is a shame.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I as much as I love that and I love Veep, I mean, it's. I bet he kind of feels like maybe I should do something different. Maybe I'm gonna do like an animated movie or a romantic comedy. Who knows?
Yeah, I know. I wonder actually. I know. Yeah, because he's never done anything like that. Oh, I tell you something else was really. I don't know if it's a thing. I think people here have seen it in the UK, but in America, I don't know if it's really big. But have you seen The Peep Show?
No.
Oh, so that's massive over here. Well, not massive, but most people have seen it over here. But if you like, try that. That's fantastic. That's on Netflix as well. Get through the first couple of episodes. The first episode, like most things, the first episode is good, but it's not sort of a fair indication of how funny the later stuff is. But yeah, Peep Show is amazing.
So I heard of a show the other day that sounds like it was a pretty big deal over in the UK that I'd never heard of before as like something that would be really worth watching. God, I'm trying to find the name of it really quick. It is Look Around You. Have you ever seen that?
No, I don't think I have. Is that on Netflix?
Yeah, I don't know if it's on Netflix, but basically it's like a weird like fake science show that was created for the BBC.
Oh, with
Peter Serafinowicz.
That's it, Peter Simon. Yeah. I have seen bits of it. But I know people who say the same thing. They say it's amazing, like the best thing ever. Yeah, because it was based on a show we used to have over here, which was Open University, which was basically a series of in the 70s and early 80s, like lectures that were sort of on TV, so you could follow along a course. And these are kind of pastiche that. That's meant to be that. Yeah, that's meant to be really. Oh, I tell you another fantastic series. I think it's on Netflix, but it might have been taken off. Utopia. Have you seen that? Oh, that's amazing. Hang on. Is it called is it Utopia? Hang on. I need to do a quick. I'm going to do a quick search. Sorry, dude.
No, it's okay. What's it about?
It's basically it's a conspiracy theory show. It's 2 seasons, and there's someone writes a graphic novel basically, and the graphic novel details the end of the world, and it gets released on limited run, and it's basically true.
It is Utopia.
Utopia, yeah. Oh my god, it's amazing.
That sounds great. I need to check it out.
Amazing. Yeah, really good. Have you found it? Is it on Netflix?
Yeah, it is.
Watch it. I love Netflix. So good.
We need to just do like a Netflix only show next time. John, that is actually all I have. Thank you for being subjected to my 5 questions and all of the other ones. I appreciate you taking the time, and I love the Wildstorm.
Oh, thanks, man.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel with the Wildstorm's artist, Jon Davis-Hunt. You can find him on Twitter at Jon Davis-Hunt, on his website at jondavis-hunt.com, and his work in the Wildstorm at DC Comics. If you're a fan of the show, there's some big news. Off Panel now has a Patreon. If you like the show and want to support it, consider backing it on Patreon at patreon.com/offpanel. There are fun rewards and insider information you get if you do. Big thanks to all my existing patrons, including Dan Garino, Jacob Sorelli, Ford Gilmore, David Baraldi, Evan Blazer, Andrew Scott, Brian McRae, Ira James Udaskin, Benjamin Birdie, Henning Allers, Modern Magic Stories, Nick Hall, Bruno Batista, Abraham Reisman, Adrian Diaz, Bobby Angus, Bjorn Basin, Darren Neely, John Hendrick, Steve Anderson, Michael Perlman, Phil Nowell, Ian Maxfield, Cliff Chang, Benjamin Shipper, Colin McMahon, Chris Palmer, Maxwell Schmidt, Scott McGovern, Nathan Fairbairn, Kat McKenzie, Lou Iovino, Christopher Carter, Nicholas Kesslake, Greg Rucka, Ryan Mayle, Adam Highfill, Nicholas Gardner, Andrew Corrigan, Fiona Staples, Chris Morris, Chris O'Halloran, Mark Abbott, Mike Murphy, Michael Shirley, Tom Barnett, Jim DiMonacos, Norbert, Nick Lowe, James Kaplan, and Mission Comics and Art in San Francisco. You guys are all the best. Don't forget to like the show on Facebook at /sketched, that's SKTCHD, follow on Twitter at @sketchcomic, or follow me at @slicefriedgold. Want more from Off Panel? Subscribe on iTunes or Stitcher and give the show a rating or review while you're at it. Quick thanks to the band Voltpeck, whose excellent track Outro from their album Volmilch opens and closes the show now. Give them a listen as they're totally rad. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.